So we'll get this recorded, and then I want to make sure I can see as many of you as possible. So it's recording. Excellent. Good. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to my party. Welcome the opportunity to talk a little bit about building a person-person business. Now, this has been years in the making in terms of different principles and different ways to teach it and different intuitive ahas and breakthroughs and a lot of struggles wanting to figure out how to help someone learn some of the lessons that I kind of learned wandering through the dark, so to speak. Be able to get through those, shorten that learning curve as much as possible. Now, a couple of things. Everything that we talk about tonight may not resonate with you directly. Okay. And that may be, you may not be a coach. I'm going to primarily be referencing people that want to build some kind of coaching business, some kind of impact business on people's lives. And there's a multitude of different types of coaches. But please, I would ask that you open your mind to kind of fill in the blank of like what we talk about in this session as a parent or as a leader in the community or as a leader at your workplace or whatever it might be. I promise you there's going to be really valuable things in what we talk about, even if it doesn't all directly connect to you. I'm going to give as many examples as I can to clarify what I mean by being a person as possible. But it's interesting to find that while I would love eventually, and I've been playing around with AI and figuring this out, but I'd love to have an assessment that helped you be able to determine whether you are more oriented to being a person or a people person. I find that because we have the capacity for both, just like being introverted and extroverted, we are both. And the difference of your natural orientation is such a small degree, but you experience it in a big way. You have both tendencies, you have both capacities, but you'll experience just that little difference in orientation subjectively in a really big way. And that's really similar to what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I would just ask that you kind of eat the fish and spit out the bones in terms of what you hear tonight and what you don't have to be a person in empathetic orientation to benefit from what we're talking about tonight. But if you are a person, and you are desiring to or have been trying to build or are a successful coach, this is going to knock it out of the park for you, in my personal opinion. I would say humble opinion, but that's not true. I've just spent a lot of time working on the practice of that. But with all that said, let's dive into right off the bat just a couple of things. I already sent you a little video, a little bit about me, and different things like that. Whether you got it or not, I would imagine you're here because you know who I am, you've at least heard of me, and are interested in learning a little bit more. Those of you who have attended these before, you know I don't spend a whole lot of time in what they call the setup. I don't spend a whole lot of time developing credibility in a certain type of way that is going to start to get the emotional hooks in you so that then I can talk about all the testimonials, then I can talk about the problems and the pain, and I can give you just enough information that at the end of it, you're like, wow, he really told us a lot. But if you were to immediately go to an analyst right afterwards and say, what did he actually teach you? You'd have a hard time doing that, but you'd be able to confirm, but I bought. And that's just not a way that I operate. Maybe I'd have more clients that if I did it that way. But that's probably a great place to start. If you are a person, you are not oriented as naturally for more as you are naturally oriented for enough. And so I think that's a really cool place for us to start in terms of talking about this orientation. This has had a few different iterations. I used to talk about it in terms of transformational business, if you're oriented more to the business of transformation, or transformational coaching, if you're more oriented to the actual engagement and the coaching. And that gave us some cool ways to talk about it and some things to consider, but it didn't quite hit the way that I wanted it to. It wasn't quite as practical and as clear as I wanted it to be. And then it continued to develop from there. And eventually it landed in one of my favorite places to land, and that's in the biological game of being human, in the actual neurology of how we're built. That there are actually there are a different part of the brain that lights up when we are operating in a person orientation than when we are operating in a people person orientation. Okay. And in the scientific explanation of this, this is called our empathetic orientation. And there are two types of empathetic orientation. I had no idea. I knew that empathy was amazing, and I knew that it was something that great coaches struggled with having a little too much of, and imposter syndrome. And we're going to talk about that tonight and how that shows up and how to address that as a person-person orientation. But I didn't realize there were two primary different types of empathy in terms of how you connect to it naturally. Again, you have the capacity for both. So if any time you're like, but I can relate to both sides, that's what makes this a little bit tricky. We need to look at the evidence in terms of how you want to connect with people, how you want to acquire clients, how you want to engage with them, and how you do your self-work. That's where the difference is going to be. Not in terms of what you're open to, what you think is a really good idea, or even what you feel is a really good idea. I had a conversation with a colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, who was like, Paul, I am a person. This is so helpful. I was like, and I know this person really well, so I asked a couple more questions. I was like, actually, if you don't mind me saying, you're a people person. He's like, why do you say that? When I try to build a course or I try to do an event, I need to think about a person. And if I can really connect to a person, then I can build the course. Then I can do that. I was like, yeah, that's what really good people persons do. Guess what a person does more often than not? Again, everyone hear me? These aren't absolutes. These are tendencies. We get this? Okay. What a person would do is go, okay, I want to build a course. I want to do an event. So I'm going to think about one person. And then I'm going to go, oh shit, why am I doing the course and the event? I'm just going to go talk to that person. I just want to coach with that person. I just want to work with that person. I don't want to build campaigns and funnels. I just want to be right here, me and that person. And so it becomes difficult at the very least, impossible at the most, to build the people person concepts because the very natural orientation is the person. Now, there are a lot of people person businesses that draw in the person. Classic example, we talked about this in the last session. Okay. Classic example is network marketing. Has anyone here ever done network marketing? Anybody? Liars. Every one of you should put your hand up. I guarantee you you may not have realized that you did. I know that I've certainly had experiences with those as well. Like, wait a second, I didn't realize. But that is a classic example of a environment, a temperature, if you will, a culture that draws in persons by the droves, but it is a people person business. There are very few. I was a part of one a long time ago in real estate where the top package we would provide was $20,000 and I would get half of that. So I could be a person in that and be really successful. It didn't hurt that it was the early 2000s and you could point at a house and make 40 grand. And so I was kind of riding a wave that made me look way more successful than I was probably actually capable of being. But that was one of few network marketing, direct sales organizations that I've heard of that a person could naturally thrive. Now, can a person thrive in a people person business? Yes. We've got a spectrum here. We've got a spectrum of people who have felt like they were drowning, felt like they were the fish being told to climb the tree in people person businesses and people person strategies and people person techniques, all the way to the person who has been killing it, knocking it out of the park. But typically, when I get deep in with those people, what they're really concerned about is how to sustain it. They're more tired than they want to admit. It's not as fulfilling as they thought it would be, as it was conceptually in their mind. Okay? So here are some important things that I wrote down just as a start to the conversation about whether you are a people person or a person in terms of your orientation, because we have the capacity for that empathy in all of us, for both of them. The first is understanding the dispositional empathy is it has a certain intimacy to it. It is very personal. And that's not to say that the people person doesn't appreciate intimacy, doesn't enjoy being very personal. But in terms of what charges their batteries, in terms of creation, what charges their batteries in terms of day in, day out, it's going to be that one-on-one, that more intimate, that, oh, yeah, my strategic plan says I should spend 15 minutes with this person. I have no idea how that's possible. I want to spend an hour and a half with this person. That's a person. And so needing to have a model, needing to have a business strategy that supports that and you can still be profitable is super important because there's a lot of persons that are killing it in terms of magnifying their person capacities, but they're in a people person box or strategy. So there's only so much they can do unless they get to make the rules, unless they get to choose what they charge, unless they get to choose how often they do it, autonomy and all these different things. That is it easier to be a person than a people person? No. Is it harder? No. But if you're a person and all of your strategies are based as people person strategies, it's going to be really hard. Just like if you made a people person do person stuff day in and day out. I heard this all the time for the last 20 years. People would talk to me and I'd tell them how many clients I was meeting with every day and how many days I was meeting with them. And I would usually get this kind of response. Whoa, geez, how do you do that? How do you meet with 6, 7, 8 people a day, 4 days a week for an hour and a half each? How do you do that? Yeah, and granted, there was a time that my person orientation was very much entangled with my workaholism orientation. But with that said, that charged my batteries. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. A people person can love that in little bits or in slight small doses consistently. But if they start to turn up the heat on one-on-ones and personal interactions and spending more time with people than their strategic need to scale this business and take over the world kind of strategy might have, of course, to make a positive impact and transform, they would burn out quickly. Whereas a person, when they are allowed to own, that's what they are. See, that's an important key. That's an important key. As you're kind of checking your temperature, gauging which orientation you are, you may be like, Paul, I thought I was a person, but I get burned out trying to be a person. Well, let me tell you why that is. And I think this is important for our whole conversation tonight. Okay. Why that is you've got something in your brain, a programming called reference. Reference is I'm noticing everything around me so I can learn stuff without having to do it myself. So Billy Bob ran off at night and jumped out and fell off a cliff and died. That's a great reference to know that I probably shouldn't go running around at night in this area, or at least that direction. Okay. And so that's a great reference. When reference, this natural process in our brain that has helped us evolve, helped us stay alive, started getting tied in with shame, started getting tied in with self-worth, guess what it became? Comparison. This is one of the reasons why it is impossible to get rid of comparison. It's built into your evolutionary brain. What we want to do is clean it out so we can get back to being this helpful tool of reference rather than being this evaluation of our self-worth and our alignment. So if you've got that shame, trauma, attachment wounds in there, and you feel I should be a person, I want to do it this way, but there's a part of you that isn't quite sure you actually have permission to do that because of reference, because you've got persons around you, because you've got leaders, because you've got marketing experts and gurus talking about person strategies, because even they weren't necessarily sensitive to these two differences, then that reference turned to comparison is going to exhaust you even when you're in your authentic lane. Because there's going to be this question of maybe I shouldn't be doing it this way. And for whatever reason, dumb enough, tough enough, I don't know, I was able to power through that for the majority of the last 20 years and get to a place where I could be a little bit more intentional, a little bit more clear, rather than feel like I was just being ignorantly rebellious. And now being able to turn around and teach and say, hey, this was a hard path to trod. This was a difficult one to create, but it's here now. And I'd love to show you where it is. And I'd love to show you how it is. It's not a magic bullet. You realizing that you're a person rather than a people person, or maybe you're some balance of both, equally. I don't know that doesn't exist. Isn't suddenly going to make everything a 180-degree turn. But I promise you, the traction you'll sense at a deep level, the pace, oh, you guys, the pace that you will allow yourself to live life at, the pace you'll allow yourself to build business at, the calm that comes with that, The orientation to a person, when it's clean, when it's clear of the shame and the trauma and the attachment wounds, is far more associated to enough than it is to more, 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 more. Okay. I don't know enough about the research. It's still something that I'm getting into in terms of dispositional empathy and societal empathy, in terms of the depths and the reaches of it. But I wouldn't be surprised if a people person has a much stronger dopaminergic effect. Their dopamine is stronger. That nudge that we have as human beings for more is actually more of a shove or a hard push in a people person than it might be in a person. And I was actually having a conversation with an amazing human that I get to coach with earlier today. And we were talking about hearing people say, oh, you got to do this to be able to make the money. You got to be able to do this to be successful. And it had never occurred to me to step back early in my career and go, wait, what do you think making money means? Because if you think that's like $1 million a year, I'm really okay with a number way less than that. I'm really okay. Did you know that less than 3% of coaches make $100,000 or more? Less than 1% make over $150,000? Okay. So when I found out that I make more than a tenth of a percent of coaches, and I spent so many years feeling like I was a loser because I'm hearing about $400,000 a month, $5 million a year business, $10 million a year. I was like, wow. And when I realized that's a people person business, at least, if not more than that. And we could talk about the pyramid scheme of marketers who call themselves coaches to sell coaching to coaches to sell coaching to sell coaches to sell coaching to coaches, and no one's actually doing coaching. They're doing consulting and passing the. Anyway, that's a conversation for a different day. I appreciate the game of marketing, and whether people person or person, marketing is an important piece, but that orientation can make a huge difference. And I also understand there's just like coaches, there's some out there that are really great, and there's lots that are whatever not really great would be. Okay. So intimacy, personal. Here's another thing that's important to know if you happen to be person oriented. Niching down is really hard for you. And I would argue not necessary. A people person, it's very important because of the scale, because of the orientation, to figure out a niche and go. For that to work in that world, I see that niches are super important. If you're a person coach or leader, niches are not important. They will come to you. You don't need to go find your niche. It will find you as you serve and connect and approach people differently. And what feels like it'll take too long to get there won't feel long at all when you're in your authenticity and you're in your alignment of this orientation. So that's something that I've noticed in this research and looking back at this at the last 20 years of my experience and the thousands of coaches that I've had the opportunity to mentor and work with in the last 20 years is that niches, I never bought into them enough to be like, yes, that's my problem. That's what's going to break me free. And yet I saw millions of testimonials of I found my niche and everything, whatever. Well, those were people persons. A person wants to go find out what that person's niche is and how they can show up and hold a container for that, whether in their relationships, in their health, in their marriage, in their business, in their spiritual deconstruction or transformation or whatever it is. So that's something to keep in mind if you've ever struggled figuring out a niche that actually gave you traction. Now, persons find niches and they get a big high. Yes, that, oh my gosh, when someone asks me, what do you do? That's what I'm going to say. My world is fixed. Everything's better. And then a month later, you still don't have any clients and you're just looking for the next high because persons will still get the conceptual high of the people-person strategies. But then a month later or a year later, either it totally flopped or it's utterly exhausting to try and keep it going. Okay? The next piece is that connected more. Then that doesn't mean if you're a person, you're doomed to just enough rather than more, but your portal to more is through enough. Whereas a lot of people persons need to go chase more, and then eventually they find out, well, enough was way back here. But most persons don't have the masochism, okay, to self abandon that heavily, to go figure that out the hard way, and so they'll unconsciously just sabotage themselves from ever getting there. Okay, so and then so a person, this one's tough because again, everybody wants to say they're this person, but a person appreciates people, or excuse me, appreciates the so oh, excuse me, I'm just trying to figure out what I was writing here. Okay. The person appreciates the people person strategies and pieces and things. They can see that it works. They will feel a draw to go, that's how I should do it. But then the evidence continues to fall apart. And unfortunately, especially if you got that trauma and that shame and those attachment wounds involved, when that happens, guess who's to blame? Yourself. There's something wrong with me. I'm flawed. And tragically, the number of people that I believe were born to be phenomenal leaders and phenomenal coaches as person leaders and person coaches gave up on it because they figured those were signs that they were headed the wrong direction, that that was not their vocation, that was not their calling, that was not their purpose. Was because they could come to a presentation like this, they could watch things on social media, they would go to events and just be like, that's it. Oh my gosh, finally, because they said it just a little bit differently as a people person. And so why not give it another try? Because their soul keeps calling them to this piece. They're willing to keep investing, keep trying these things. And it's so close that it feels right. Again, the orientation between the two is so close. And so that's why I feel it's so important for you to be sensitive about finding out which one you are, not because you're going to go, oh, I'm going to get rid of all the people person stuff. No, there's essential elements to that. But the priority is going to be to make sure that, depending on what it is, you start or you continue to come back to the person authenticity. And the challenge is with the references we have out there, there's lots of reasons for us to give up prematurely on doing our businesses the way a person would, especially when we're in a people person business like network marketing, or we're in a people person business like high scale coaching that isn't actually transformative coaching. It's more marketing coaching, or it's more consultative coaching, where the scale of your information is king, not the intimacy of the container that you create for another human. And it's easy to see that and have these reference points going, oh, so and so started using that method and they started making this much money a month. And I started at the same time as them and it's not working for me. So I'm going to bail. And then maybe we have the courage to trust our person instincts just a little bit more. But the further we get away from the people person trodden path, the more doubt we start to have, the more imposter we start to feel. And then just like shame was originally built for in our evolution, shame was built as a survival mechanism to bring us back to the tribe. We go back to the mainstream people person approach, only to churn and frustrate ourselves and maybe get enough wins here and there, maybe learn some lovely language so that when someone like me walks up and asks how you're doing, you can make it sound like you're doing a lot better than you actually are. Let's do it differently. Okay? So what we're going to talk about tonight is person oriented strategies for lead generation, person oriented strategies for client acquisition, person orientation strategies for the actual engagement, whether how you lead someone as a leader in corporate America or whatever, or as a coach, or in volunteer armies like network marketing or whatever, and then person orientations for your self work. And I think that right there is one of the biggest game changers. And we'll talk about that when we get there. Okay. Before we dive into those four categories, any questions about what's been shared so far? Any thoughts? Any feedback? Is this landing? I mean, a lot of you are still here, so I would imagine it's at least got you intrigued enough to stick around. So yeah. Okay, cool. And I'm watching the chat as well. So if you have a question and you're like, I don't know that I can interrupt, throw it in the chat and Happy to assist you with that. Okay, cool. Let's dive into lead generation. Okay, let's dive into lead generation as a person. Now, we've got 90 minutes tonight. So admittedly, there's going to be some limitations to this, but I wanted to make sure I gave you the some pieces that if this is all you ever got from me on this particular topic, that it would be enough. So we're going to talk about social media and we're going to talk about in-person lead generation. Okay. So let's talk about social media as a person. Who's interested in how to do social media as a person? Anyone here in a business where you've been told social media is a great way to grow your business, and yet you have a more love-hate relationship with? Okay, got it. Well, first of all, guess what? As a person, you can build a successful business without social media. You absolutely can. There are a lot of cases where I would say, but why? So at least try what I'm going to share with you tonight before you totally bail on social media. But no, if you do, you're still going to be okay. You're still going to be okay. You can absolutely build a business without it. It's just faster. It's just a little bit more accessibility than you would get otherwise. But the great part about a person business is you're not looking for everybody. You're building businesses where each person is highly valued because between you and you are highly valued. And as I will show you, you'll be able to charge high values for that. Partly because you will have done a lot of work to get there. And you are likely as a person because of certain factors we'll talk about undervaluing what you've been through and undervaluing the skills you have to offer and the space that you can hold for someone. Okay. And undervaluing that makes that very difficult. And also being able to courageously connect to the higher value prices being something that draws the higher value out of your client as well. But the challenge is if you're going to charge more, you've been taught you need to close better. And that's not true for a person. And we'll talk about that too. Okay. All right. So social media, first of all, as a person, this may be enough to help some of you exhale. It's not an everyday thing. As a person, social media is not an everyday thing. It's just not. You don't have to. An everyday thing is someone who's building a following, an influencer, where the numbers of likes, the numbers of followers. Now, is that a factor? Well, yeah, if no one is seeing your posts, if you have zero friends because you haven't connected with anybody and you're just posting every once in a while, yeah, there's a reality to it if we go to the extremes. But in terms of being able to be successful in a person, again, I'm talking about a coaching business, but this can apply to a lot of different places with a little bit of creativity, a little bit of integration and application. You don't have to do it every day. So that's the first thing. Okay, this is not a daily thing. Any of you gotten into that mode of social media where you missed a day and you thought like you might as well have slashed your social media tires and you're gonna have to go buy new tires and rebuild because it was like some magic spell that you broke? Okay. So oh, got it. I saw a hand go up, but if you throw any questions in the chat, I'm happy to interact. It's one of my favorite things to do. But just throw it in the chat so I can pause when we're ready. But I think it was a yes, me, in terms of the hand raise. So social media, not an everyday thing. Here is your primary objective for social media as a person, nurturing and reminding. Okay? You're nurturing a connection you created elsewhere. And you are reminding them that you still exist. Okay? There's a lot going on out there. I don't know if any of you noticed. There's a lot going on in the world. That there's a lot of stimulation, a lot of things to distract us. And as a person, social media is your way to cut through the noise every once in a while, just to say, hey, I'm still here. And that alone relieves some of the pressure of how to craft the right thing. Persons aren't interested in crafting the thing that scales the stuff to whatever. That's draining, unbelievably draining. So if you can trust that the real magic is not happening on your news feed, is not happening from your posts, that relief of pressure will actually probably result in you doing what you're originally taught to do on social media better because you're not trying to do it on purpose, which is part of what adds unnecessary pressure to a person, their imposter syndrome, which is actually a result of their sensitivity, which is part of what makes them such great coaches, but makes it so hard for them to get to scale where they can support themselves full time. We'll dive into that more in the self work. Okay. So, social media number one does not have to be every day. And the number one goal is to nurture and remind. That's all you're doing, going on to say, hey, here's me. Hey, here's stuff that I care about. Not from a proclaiming it from the rooftops of this is what I believe in. If you'd like to, great. If that doesn't drain you, and the comments that tend to come with that as you get more and more people's attention, do that. Go for it. But a lot of persons don't look forward to commentary confrontation. It can be very draining. And while there are great ways to be able to process that better, it's very easy for a person to make that just overcoming confrontation, overcoming those comments, their full-time job, and they lose the opportunity to even build a successful business. So not every day, and to nurture and remind. So just think about that. What kind of things could I post that are just something I was thinking about this morning, or something I read in a book yesterday, or just something that I feel might be unique to me? And by the way, spoiler alert, the way you do your self-work as a person is going to feed how you nurture and remind people who you are on social media. But first and foremost, as a person, you will want to get rid of the pressure that social media is where you sell. Social media is where you tell people what you do. Okay? One of my favorite things is when clients I work with get clients that come to them and say, I don't know what you do, but I'd love to do it with you. That's such a good sign. That's such an amazing part of being a person is people feel you, not feel what you're promoting. Okay, not feel how brilliant and intelligent you seem to be. Now, there is a certain threshold of competence and warmth. Okay, you want to have a good balance of sounding competent enough and sounding warm enough. And a lot of us are struggling in how we show up on social media because we're more one than the other, or neither at all, because we're following some routine program built by a people person rather than the person. Okay? Here's another tidbit about social media. Magic is in the messenger. Okay? That you want to take things further, don't try to take it further with your post. Take it further in Messenger. And Messenger is just a substitute for if you don't have someone's phone number. And I highly recommend audio. Audio messages, if you have their phone number, audio text messages, if you have their contact through social media, audio DMs. You can do that in both Instagram and Facebook. Being able to provide audio and keep it simple. Okay, and very similar to some of the other parts we're going to talk about, focus a little bit more on simple questions. Okay, and putting connections out there that are meant to die. Okay, videos, it just depends. If that's something you like to do, Melissa, then rock and roll. Well, I know that's something you like to do because I have a whole text feed full of them. Okay, not full of them. She's very respectful of that. But like, yeah, if video is something that you like, great. If it's not, at least challenge yourself with audio. But even if you can't do that, don't try to do it in the comments section, and don't try to turn your post into a big commercial or into a message that somehow like gets people's attention, then just has a little bit of commercialization at the end. It's not going to jive with your energy. You're simply on there to nurture connections you've already made and to remind them who you already are. All right? Yeah, so don't worry about the videos. You can just do the audio or text, very simple things. And here's the last thing I'll share about social media for the amount of time we have tonight. Send messages and create connections that are meant to die. It will actually build more trust. If you can reach out to someone, see how they're doing, and then not keep following up, not keep prodding, not keep poking to get that conversation to go to where you could have an enrollment conversation. Have a conversation because you actually want to ask them the question you're asking, and once it's answered, be like, that's great, thanks for sharing, and then move on. You're going to want to have a system that helps you come back and follow up. Persons are generally not very good at following up. They're usually not very systematized people. So that's where we would talk a little bit about in a different part of building a person-person's business, how to build systems, how to find the right resources that will help you do that so you don't have to remember to do it, and how those can be person-person friendly as well. Okay? So that's a little bit about social media. The other piece is in-person stuff. I call them your bird songs. You're going to want to start exploring what are my bird songs? What are the things that I feel really good about doing that are not connected to coaching? Okay. I love hiking. Okay. I love going on different adventures that create some adrenaline rushes. I love outdoors kind of things. I also love art. I love drawing. I love painting kind of things. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go find things where those things can be expressed. And I'm going to go be in my bird song, singing my bird song. And the energy of that is going to be make it more natural to connect with people. I'm going to connect with those people, and I'm going to trust that if any of those people are people I might be able to show up well for a coach as, that the connection will tip that scale. And then I'm going to connect with them on social media. Why? Because I simply want to be able to nurture and remind them that I'm still here. And maybe one of these times I'll share something that just kind of got their attention, but not because it was a commercial, simply because they were experiencing something in their life, and then you popped into their mind. Anybody ever gotten a client like that? It wasn't even like a direct logical connection. That's what a person is built. That's the if you want to get into the energy, not to be too woo-woo about it, that's the feminine type of business that a person tends to be able to surf in more than the hard paddling of a person business. The people person's way more interested in the hard paddles because they're going to ride one big wave and it's going to have a huge wash and it's going to have a big payout. And as cool as that sounds, it's not going to charge a person's batteries. Okay. I know that because I've had so many big washes, big landfalls, big successes, and I had never been more unmotivated in my life. Okay. Because it wasn't the intimacy, it wasn't the one-on-one-ness that a person craves. So do that and go find groups, go find experiences, and go find events that are not made for networking directly. Okay. If you're a part of those groups and it serves you, great, keep going. If you've tried to be part of those groups and it has drained you, I'm giving you permission to stop it. You don't need it. You don't need it. Go to stuff that interests you in other areas. Just go where people are. And as a person, you only need to go where a couple of people are. It doesn't have to be hundreds or thousands. In fact, the more intimate, the better. And if you're like, well, I don't have a lot of money for those kinds of things. Well, guess what? There's tons of people in different groups, okay? And there's different online services and different things that you can use to find like Eventbrite and Facebook groups and different things like that, where there's a lot of people who don't have, tons and tons of extra cash to be like, I feel like going on a cruise to Italy next week because I have a few days off. It's more like I want to go walk in the park and talk to some people about birds. Like the possibilities are endless. That doesn't require a lot of money, where you're going to go meet people where the objective is not to network. Because one of two things happens for the person, in my experience, okay, is either you go to those things and you meet people that are great for you to work with, and that gets to evolve at its own pace so you don't get exhausted trying to make it go faster than it needs to go, because you're going to have enough going at once that you'll have a consistent harvest. You'll be okay if you're willing to stick around long enough to work through some of the doubt, the imposter syndrome, the shame, and we'll get to that in the self-work. Or just from doing that, singing in your bird songs seems to send out law of attraction, manifestation, whatever you want to call it. And there's physics to this, okay? Quantum physics to this. When you're singing your bird song, it seems to echo out there, and the people you are seeking start to seek you. In 20 years, I've had so many clients where I was doing this and focusing on this strategy, and then all of a sudden clients showed up over here. And I have no idea where they came from. I have no idea why they just happened to stumble on so-and-so who told them about me or whatever. That's an amazing playground for a person, but it's hard to trust because you're being told by all the people persons that you can't count on that's not scalable, that's not blah, 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 blah. And you start to doubt your own person orientation. You start to sabotage it and start to, go to the blue light like the insect. It's so beautiful. And you get zapped. That's hard. And I have a ton of empathy for people that have experienced that because that has been me many times, and I still feel that draw sometimes. Even with a massively successful coaching business, even with having taught thousands of coaches how to trust these instincts just a little bit more, it's still there. You never become invincible to it. Okay. So, any questions about the lead generation, the social media piece, or the bird songs? Cool. Awesome. Client acquisition. Client acquisitions with a person-person orientation. First and foremost, your go-tos, your ideal opt-in, if you will, are interviews, discovery calls, and mini experiences, where it's just you and the other person. Okay. You'll be told by a lot of people out there that those don't scale or you need to build a team to do those. It's not true. Maybe if you want to make millions of dollars, but I've got a pretty good feeling that a lot of us would be pretty happy with, a relatively good chunk of that rather than all of it. Okay. If the statistics are true, 99% of us would be pretty happy with making six figures, being able to add some discovery calls that we're told don't scale. Being insatiable with interviews is one of my favorite things as a person coach or leader. Meeting someone really cool and having a connection. Have you ever wondered like, well, how do I take this to the next level? How do I pitch them to get that? Anyone ever struggled with that? No, I'm the only one. Okay, cool. So here's what you do. When you're talking to them, you go, wow, you go, Vicky Lee, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I would love to interview you. There's some questions I'd love to ask that just you and me in kind of our own space, I'd love to ask and explore with you. I'd love to interview you. And you can play with that, script that however it makes sense for you. But people feel really important when you say you want to interview them. And you don't have to have a podcast to do that. You don't even have to record it. You can just say, I love interviewing people. I love learning about what makes them tick. And you seem so cool. Would you be open to setting up a time to do an interview where I can learn just a little bit more about like what's important to you, what's shaped you, what's helped you the most in your life? Okay, which perfectly sets up what we're going to talk about in terms of the next piece of client acquisition. So be open, be excited, okay, about um, about the interviews, the discovery calls, and mini experiences, and not necessarily automated experiences. Okay, persons like to be pretty hands-on. You want to automate the stuff that is all the in between of the hands-on stuff, and you can experiment with just about any of it. Okay, but the opportunity to be able to focus in on the stuff that you're being told doesn't scale, a person thrives in the stuff that doesn't scale. If you haven't been able to thrive in the stuff that doesn't scale, again, it's been those reference part of your brain that is turned into comparison, and it becomes tough to trust long enough to tip the scale. Because I will tell you, in a lot of cases, it's not an absolute, but in a lot of cases, person strategies take some time. Okay, I remember reading once that the Alaskan oil pipeline, when they first turned it on, it took like 42 days for oil to come out the other side. Can you imagine sitting there just waiting for that to happen? Like, did it work? Did we do it properly for 42 days? The temptation to turn it off and be like, let's go in there and look and see if it's working. We do that all the time without realizing that that's what we're doing. And again, it comes from the shame, the attachment wounds, the comparison, the imposter feelings, that even when we're doing the actions, when our heart is not in it, when our authenticity is not in it, it will sabotage it even when we're taking the actions. It's tantamount to doing exercise, and if your heart isn't in it, you burn less calories. It isn't as helpful to your body and your joints, kind of a thing. So it's been tricky. No one's here telling you a duh to this. It's taken me over a decade to start to trust this element and these differences in building a person business. And the last thing in client acquisition is you do these calls as you trust the non-scalable stuff because you're going to make up the difference in terms of what you charge or how long people stay with you. That's something that a lot of people underestimate. Okay. As a people person can get a lot of people in to buy their stuff, but how long do they stick around without having to keep recreating new stuff for people to buy. Just get them to stick around to get to stay with you, to experience you. Even if you're not charging a ton, you're going to make more than most coaches because it costs a lot to put in more and more work, to create new stuff, to constantly be churning and figuring out what to sell the next person. Okay? So keep that in mind. And then we come into transformational conversations. Transformational conversations is the kind of conversation we want to start having um, to go from these interviews, from these discovery calls, and we can plant some of these seeds in a connection that we have with someone at an event or someone that we met at a family member's wedding or whatever. But they have a few basic pieces. And I've taught this in the past as the sales arc. It's actually evolved beyond what it used to be taught as well as when to deliver it and how to finish it is especially very different. But as a few very basic parts. One is pretty shockingly innovative. Tell me about you. That's where it always starts. Like, hey, I people love for other people to love to learn about them. Okay, people don't love to have people love to learn about them so that they can sell them something. And while they may have experienced that and you come along clean and open and not trying to do that, you may still run into a little bit of that. But as my father said beautifully over the last several years, people's walls have never been so high, but they've never been so thin. So if it feels like they're resistant at first, they just need to check in with a couple of things and interact with you enough to see that you're not setting them up for something. And this comes into some of the self-work because just because you don't think you are, you've been taught to for so long that it takes some time to really be able to flush that out. It takes some conversations with someone that you would normally give a close to or try to pitch a certain way, and you don't, and you just let them go. And then your nervous system gets to see that that's actually okay, that that's allowed to do. And that makes you more confident and more present and more available for the next one. That's a hard strategy to teach because we all want to learn the stuff that is going to close the next person we're going to talk to. And I'm sitting here telling you to start conversations that die and have enrollment conversations with people who don't buy. And it's going to make you better and better at doing that because you're going to let things that you don't control get you more sales in the long run, which is going to require less exhaustive effort for you to do it, less draining feelings of manipulation and whatever else that you've been taught to just bite the bullet on or eat the frog or whatever. And just being able to trust that, but also having the self work to limit the reference that is turned to comparison that frustrates you from waiting the 42 days for the oil to come out the other end in the first place. Then continue to turn it off and run to the end of the pipeline and look down and be like, is anything coming? Okay. And starts with, tell me about you. Then it moves into the two hot questions, the two questions that have made me more profit, more money than anything else as a person coach. And we talked about this in our last session. What do you want? And what's the toughest thing about being you? Now, there are very specific ways to set up those questions. You want to honor a human being's threat response and their autonomy response, and that can be difficult to do. The best way to avoid triggering their autonomy response is simply to ask, may I ask you a question? It sounds silly, especially if you've already been asking them questions in the conversation, but I promise you, it hits a deeper mode. It hits a deeper level to say, may I ask you a question? Sure. What do you want? And again, I don't teach a lot of mimicking, but that's one that I would emphasize. Learn to ask that with a downshift. Now, what do you want? What do you want? A downshift. What do you want? That want. You don't need to do it at the octave that I do, but feel I'm asking in the back of my throat and then want lands. Guess where? In my heart. Practice that. Practice that. It's not a manipulation because you're not selling them anything. You're genuinely inquiring. And depending on the self-work that you're doing, you can authentically back that up. Okay. Once you get some of the cobwebs and the mess out from all the other people person brainwashing you've been getting. I'm just kidding. It's not brainwashing. It's again, the variations, the orientation. Okay. So you want to practice. listening to yourself, recording it, the annoying things, right? That we know helps, but we don't want to do. Well, if you really want to have these transformative conversations, you're going to want to find the place in here, literally right here, physicality in this place. Okay. In fact, if you wouldn't mind, just try it with me right now. We'll keep everyone on mute so it's not an audio mess. But right now, just do me a favor, okay? And just lightly put your hand right here on your throat and say, what do you want? With the same tone. What do you want? What do you want? And just feel that. What do you want? Okay? Now, take your hand and put it right here and say, what do you want? What do you want? When want comes to, anybody feel that? Anybody feel the difference? Isn't that cool? This is physiological. This isn't woo-woo. This is physiological. You're asking want, desire, okay? And I get some people are like, want is a measurement of lack, like you've been found wanting. So I only ask for desires. Okay, cool. I get that. But if you're not an etymological scholar, you're probably going to be okay with the benefit of the doubt of what someone meant versus what they actually said for the most part. We can get into elite semantic, evolution another time. Kind of like the person online that's being like, you shouldn't eat oatmeal because it's toxic, right, UV? Like the people they're talking to really need to worry about cutting out oatmeal. Come on, let's talk about like, hey, let's just go to the drive-through 2 times less this week and let's get a win, kind of a thing. So, but practice that. I promise you it'll pay off. Just asking, hey, can I ask you a question? Sure. What do you want? Right there. Okay. That was a little bit dramatic. So practice it enough that it doesn't sound like someone looks at you like, what? Where you're like, what do you want? Like, that might backfire. Okay. But find that natural resonance from the heart, because guess where the resonance from the heart goes to? Theirs. It's rad. Then the threat response is handled with a very simple terminology, a very simple phrase that is less about the phrase. You can actually use this phrase as a scripting, or you can use a version of it if it has the same feeling, and that's tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. So I asked, may I ask you a question? And then I said, what do you want? And I got that want from the heart. I downshifted and I landed there to land in theirs. It's not perfect. These are not Jedi mind tricks. Some people are closed off and not interested, and that's totally cool. And some people are still afraid to tell you what they actually want. Okay, and I can teach you elephant talk another time because that's an important part of this. When you notice someone is fronting, how to be able to trust that you can ask them about it without offending them. Because that's something that is also a tricky orientation to a person. A people person is willing to offend because they're going after the people and they know that's just going to be, that's the reality of what they're doing. A person is much more sensitive to offending people, which can work against you in the client acquisition process. It can work against you in your lead generation and some of your marketing efforts and even how you show up on social media. Again, we don't want to get to the place where we don't give a shit and we're thick-skinned. How many of us have tried to do that? I've tried that. And then we realize that thick skin means what's hard to let out is hard to let in. So even if it seems to not be hurting us as much, we're certainly making it so we have to work even harder to get to the same kind of place and connection. So there's a little bit of a dance there that's important to consider. But tell me more about that. When they start to answer, what do you want? And there are lots of other techniques that I can teach you when we have more time to be able to couch this, to be able to set up more than just, may I ask you a question? What do you want? But if you just did that, may I ask you a question? What do you want? And then whatever they answer, going, oh, that's cool. Tell me more about that. Or, oh, that's cool. I'd love to hear more about that. That's cool. How did that feel? Just tell me more about that kind of energy. That will soften their threat response because you're actually listening to them. And you're saying, oh, whoa, you mentioned such and such. Tell me more about that. Another thing that persons can benefit from is keeping a little notepad here and just writing down little words that you notice, little inflections that you notice. And I like to write down the word just as a little reminder word. And I put a big question mark next to it so that I can come back to it and ask them. And you come back to something they said, but you were listening and attentive, and you go, hey, a minute ago you mentioned this, and your eyes glisten just a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit about that? That's powerful. It's really, really, really powerful. And it's something that persons can do if they'll trust themselves to do it. And it's not just trusting themselves to do it, it's trusting themselves to use that kind of power responsibly and to not try to take what they're noticing to manipulate someone, which will make you feel unauthentic and you wouldn't be able to sustain it anyway. But then you get to go into, may I ask you a personal question? So that's the difference between what do you want and what's the toughest thing about being you. May I ask you a question? May I ask you a personal question, which is just kind of a flag going, hey, I'd like to go a little bit deeper and offering that kind of more subtly. May I ask you a personal question? What is the toughest thing about being you? This one, the best address to the threat response in their nervous system is actually not tell me more about that. It's stillness. Okay, not silence. We tend to get a little bit of a freeze. We kind of brace a little bit when we're trying to be quiet. Just be still. Just be still, as if your softness could speak novels, could be so inviting without having to say anything. That right there is where a person is going to really acquire the client. That's where some of the most significant parts of them are going to say yes to working with you, even if it takes a few months or even in my case, a few years for them to actually transact, because we're waiting those 42 days. And what's beautiful is once you've worked on this stuff enough and learned to trust it enough, and it doesn't take years to do it, but when things start flowing, you know that there's always going to be something. You know that you're going to be okay and that you don't need to do it the way that you had been taught. And then there's different places you can go from there with the conversation, but I will make note of this. Transformational conversations are not about creating a peak emotional experience and then closing the sale. That's what we've been taught for years, and it's very transactional. It's very manipulative, which doesn't mean it's bad. Those of you who have been to my sessions before and listened to me talk, you know that I don't believe manipulation is a bad word inherently. In fact, it's quite a beautiful word to handle masterfully. But with that said, we have changed the language. Okay. We have sounded more conscious, but it's still built on the framework of create a peak experience and close them, you know? And so, but if you're going to have a transformational conversation as a person, you will likely create those peak experiences. You'll likely feel like, oh my gosh, we were meant to meet. Oh, this was amazing. I've never shared anything like that with someone before. How many of you, that's actually another indicator that you're a person, is you get the, I've never shared that with anybody kind of conversations. It just happens naturally. You haven't even tried it. You didn't try to hone that skill. It just happens. That's an indicator of a person as well. And so being able to trust that and let that be an amazing experience, but then literally saying to them, hey, I'm noticing there's an amazing connection here. I'd I'd love to talk about working with you, but this isn't the place for that. This isn't the time for that. This was just about connection. This was about honoring this container and just getting to know each other, whether it was an interview, a discovery call, or a mini coaching experience you're giving them or whatever. But if you're interested, if you're feeling kind of the similar way, I'd love to set up a time to talk about that. But what I'd like you to do, so if I'm talking to Shelly here, Shelly, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about working with me, and I'll tell people what the investment is. Um, and I just want you to be curious about what you notice. What do you notice in yourself, about yourself, your life, anything over the next few days? Or if I talk to someone on Thursday, I'll be like, over the weekend. What do you notice about the conversation we had? What do you notice about what it felt like to connect like this? And then what do you notice about the possibility of working with me? Do you find yourself super excited about it at one point? Do you find yourself talking yourself out of it at one point? Does it, all that stuff. And Shelly, all I want you to do is just track that. Just be curious about it. Because when I follow up with you on Monday, Tuesday, whatever it is, the first thing I want to hear about, the priority for me, is just hearing about what you noticed. Because I think that's so cool. And also, Shelly, if you can do that for me, if we do work together, the patterns you notice, talking yourself into it, out of it, the reasoning, the logic, the stuff that you observe since this conversation is going to give us a phenomenal curriculum for what's been challenging you in, if I'm a health coach, in your health, if I'm a relationship coach, in your relationship, if I'm a business coach, in your business. It's going to reveal all the curriculum we need just from what you're going to be paying attention to over the next few days. And so let's not figure out how to work together from here because right now the iron is hot. We have a phenomenal connection. I'd rather let the iron cool and see if you can heat it back up yourself. And if you can, then you've got everything you need to be a great client of mine. Now, that doesn't have to be a script, but that kind of conversation I find fits a person so well. It's not hard to hear that and be like, oh, that sounds like a takeaway. And that's a proven sales technique. But it's different. It comes from a different place. I've been in sales for many years and I know what a takeaway is. And depending on the self work you do, the last section we're going to go into here in just a minute, it's not a takeaway. It's not a tactic. That's the biggest difference. It may sound like a takeaway, but I promise you it doesn't feel that way to the other person. A takeaway instills FOMO. A takeaway instills like I'm going to miss out something in my life and I'm not going to be able to solve this problem if I don't X, Y, and Z. That's a takeaway. That's not what we're doing here. We're simply pointing out that we feel really connected right now and we're having a peak experience, but we're going to really honor that by letting it be its own thing. And we're going to see if we can have enough trust for each other to come back and see what putting it back together looks like. Because if you do that, okay, Shelly, everybody, if you do that, you will have a phenomenally better coaching engagement, which is the next section we're going to talk about. If you enroll them from a peak experience, it's not a no-no. I've done it. I still do it occasionally, but it's usually someone I've already had a lot of interactions with or someone who already knows me. So it wasn't like I just took advantage of they just got to experience the Paul show and buy now and you'll save this kind of a thing. No, like there's been runway and I've gotten a feel for them and their nervous system and whatever else. Then I'm going to get an opportunity to be able to do that. But if I do that as a standard, what I just set them up for is to chase a peak experience in every coaching session that we have. And the point becomes the chase of the peak experience versus actual transformation, versus actually experiencing themselves and occurring to themselves in a different way. Okay? Any questions about that? Awesome. Cool. Let's talk a little bit about the actual coaching engagement itself as a person. Or these might be meetings you have with someone as a leader or whatever it might be. Or even in how you parent with your children or how you interact with your spouse or whatever. All these things can apply. And these elements also can spill over into how you connect with people out there in terms of your lead generation, how you have that transformational conversation in terms of your interviews or your discovery calls or whatever else. This can all be applied to those things as well. And here it is. Here are the three most important elements that I believe you will want to have in your coaching sessions and in your overall engagement. All right. Number one is spoken. Spoken. You're going to want to have spoken elements, spoken conversations in your coaching engagements. This is where you're going to find inspiration and creativity. This is where you explore. This is where you problem solve with your client. Second piece you're going to want to have to be a great coach, a great leader, a great connector is unspoken. This is where you have intuitive conversations. This is where you find authenticity that oftentimes gets hard to find in the dopaminergic stimulation of spoken conversations. Okay? We can be talking and feel like we're being guided, but it isn't until you're not talking that you can hone into the most accurate level of your authenticity and your intuition. If that's true, you're going to want to have unspoken conversations with your clients. Okay? It's not just a pause. It's not just being quiet. It's being able to shape your coaching engagements, your conversations with people, where you can start to do this a little bit more and more and more, where your trust for the unspoken conversation starts to invite a little bit more of their trust. And there are some things that you'll do that feel like pauses, that feel like being quiet as you start to work it in and allow it to become more natural. And what's amazing is depending on, again, self-work you do, some part of you that you've learned to trust in your unspoken conversations starts to talk to that part of them Now, I will warn you, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, that will feed what people call imposter syndrome, which I just like to call imposter layers. It's a like a check engine light. Just it's kind of like a safety mechanism to make sure you're not going too far, too fast, and running into an echo chamber or trying to start a cult. It seems to be part of the safety mechanism as well. Okay. And if every, I remember reading that most cult leaders, in fact, I believe the majority never set out to start one. They set out to help people, but then they got into an echo chamber. They stopped having imposter check-ins and it got out of hand. So I hope that your imposter layers never go away. I just hope that you get more and more advanced imposter layers because you are becoming more and more advanced in your coaching, more and more advanced in your deep connections in your personal relationships, more and more advanced in your impact in this world. So I hope it's never something you try and get rid of. I think it's a really good safety mechanism. But I will tell you, nothing has drawn out my imposter layers more intensely than learning the unspoken conversation. And there are certain practices, there are certain methods, certain things to doing that. I love to teach those. We don't have time for that in this space. But that's a really important thing to learn is to learn the unspoken conversation. And then lastly, learn to have the conversation of sensation. We are sensory creatures first and foremost. Human beings are sensory. Sensations are the loudest thing we speak naturally, but most of us have lost our kind of our wildness. And I mean wild in terms of nature, natural, not in terms of crazy, right? We've lost the trust in our sensations, and we've made up for it by trusting almost only in our spoken language. In fact, even when we notice the unspoken language, what do we love to do? We love to bring it to the spoken level to check in and evaluate it and make sure it's really correct. We need that validation because we're so thinker brain dominant. We're so neocortex dominant. Now, again, I'm not saying stop speaking about stuff, but we're going to want to soften that grip a little bit. Trust the unspoken a little bit more. Trust the sensation a little bit more. And I can show you very simple ways. Here's a really simple way to help a client, regardless of what type of coach you are, to get a little bit more in touch with the unspoken conversation and the sensation conversation. Simply, when you're in a session with somebody or you're having a conversation with someone in kind of a mentorship, coaching kind of role, invite them to have kind of a deeper check-in, a deeper conversation, however you want to put it. And what you're going to do is you're going to invite them to take 3 big deep breaths with an audible sigh on the exhale. And then after those 3, you're going to let them know this in advance. You're going to start a timer. You're both going to close your eyes and you're just going to sit there for, I would say, 2 to 5 minutes. Okay. I like 5 minutes because it's short enough that it wouldn't consume an entire coaching session, but it's long enough that it always feels like way more than 5 minutes, which feels like it has an expansive conversation. You get to have a conversation with yourself, and when you're both doing it together, there's almost like a little bit going on between the two of you that you can't quite put your spoken finger on. So try doing that. For any of you that are currently coaching, start instituting that and start asking your client to do that on a consistent basis. And you'll watch the pace of your coaching sessions, the pace of your conversations will naturally slow down. You'll be less dependent on the spoken conversation, which is going to trigger more of your comparison, trigger more of your shame, trigger more of your imposter layers on an ongoing basis. And you'll be able to start to trust the unspoken conversation a little bit more. Again, this doesn't mean that in a 1 hour coaching session, you're going to spend 50 minutes having an unspoken conversation. No. What's beautiful about unspoken conversations and sensation in the conversation, in the coaching session, in the engagement, is they can be relatively short and get a lot more conversation in. They can be a lot more productive. The least efficient member of transformation is the spoken conversation. The least efficient member of the healing process is the spoken conversation. Okay. So you instruct the client. Great question, Azim. Great question. So you instruct the client to, I like to let people know there's no way to do this wrong. All we're going to do is just be still and close our eyes. That's it. That's the only requirements. And there are other things I like to have people do in terms of shaping their nervous system for this. But the simplicity of just asking them, okay, what I want you to do is just what we're going to do is we're going to have an unspoken conversation with ourselves. And then you and I will be able to reflect on that. And what I want you to do is I want you to know there's no way to do this wrong. We're not trying to quiet our mind. We're not trying to go to a certain place. We're just going to take 3 deep breaths. And then I'm going to set a timer. The first time I do this with a client, this may just be me. I don't like to tell them how long. I like, hey, I'm going to set it because it becomes part of their conversation, not knowing how long it's going to be. But I let them know it won't be the majority of our conversation. It's a relatively short period of time, but it'll probably feel like more. And I just want you to know there's nothing wrong that can come up. If your head races and spins, just do your very best to just notice that. There's nothing wrong with that. If it just goes blank, great. Nothing wrong with that. If you start feeling tired, like you're dozing, no problem. Nothing wrong with that. It's the practice of something like this that starts to have a deeper conversation that you'll never quite be able to put your analytical finger on, which makes it tough to trust based on how we've been taught. And that also makes sense why it triggers our imposter syndrome because we can't quite find the reference to trust it that we're actually helping until you've been doing this long enough that the oil came out the other side of the pipeline after 42 days. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do is to get to that point. Great question. All right. Last thing about the engagement. Person coaches and leaders are not outcome focused. Okay. And there's a nuance to this, please. Okay. Not that outcomes are irrelevant, but outcomes are more experimental. It's not that we don't have outcomes that we're interested in. Like, let's say you are a health coach and an outcome is someone wants to lose 40 pounds. Cool. But as a person coach, you're going to want to frame and let them know, hey, we're going to experiment with heading towards losing 40 pounds, but we're more interested in what that reveals. We're more interested in the curriculum that brings up. We're more interested in what we learn, what we can integrate. We're more interested in the spoken, unspoken, and sensation conversation that we'll be able to have in that experiment than that outcome. Why? Because we want that outcome to practically feel like it happened as much on accident as possible. Because guess what? If that's how the outcome shows up, it's going to be so much easier to sustain. Because that's an indicator transformation actually occurred. Not to mention that outcomes are super fickle because they're heavily impacted by what we've been manufactured to want, what we've been told we need to want. Okay. And so we can set outcomes that we think we want very convincingly all day, but if we don't have a loose grip on them as experimentation, we may miss what we're actually craving, what our soul truly desires. And that doesn't mean that the outcome is off the table. It just means that we may want to land in where the experiment takes us first. Weight loss is a great example for this, just as a quick kind of summary. Let's say I want to lose 40 pounds. But I, as a person coach, my sensitivity, my personal nature, I'm not just about stick to the program, stick to the plan. I'm here to hold you accountable. I'm more about the experimentation. I'm more about the intimacy. I'm more about the personal thing that charges my batteries. This outcome is an experiment, and we're going to honor the journey and what shows up. And then all of a sudden we find out, oh my gosh, the outcome I'm looking for isn't actually 40 pounds. It's actually loving me and not needing to lose 40 pounds to do that. And then when I actually land there, guess what happens more easily than ever before? Nourishing my body in a way that I just happen to have lost 40 pounds. That's a real thing. But that's also tricky because if they're not committed to the experiment, because you didn't trust that that's what you do as a person coach, you weren't confident in that because the people person told you, you got to sell them on outcome, you got to sell them on this, da 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 da. So you lost your confidence, imposter, comparison, all the things. So you weren't able to frame it properly for them. So they're still kind of expecting a people person outcome, and then it doesn't happen. And then you talk to them about this, and they're like, okay, I can get behind that. I can fall in love with myself, but they're really only trying to fall in love with themselves so that they can finally lose 40 pounds, which isn't really loving yourself in the first place. This is why we need more person coaches. And that's just with weight loss. That's just with health, let alone with relationships and marriages, spirituality and deconstruction and businesses and you name it. We need more person coaches because we're not the only ones trying to build our business thinking we are what's wrong. There's so many people out there that are person oriented, that deserve to be way more successful in whatever they're wanting to accomplish, a deeper connection with their spouse, or even finding a spouse, okay, losing weight, building businesses, whatever it is. And they're persons in a very people person world. And they keep turning on the pipeline. Oil doesn't show up in the amount of time a people person told them it should. And so they just canceled, or they stopped going to the course, or they figured it must be something wrong with them, or they wait for the next thing. This is why I believe that personal coaching from person coaches is such a giant gap, because it's not just person coaches that deserve these kinds of breakthroughs. It's person coaches to go help persons have these breakthroughs in so many other areas of their life, whatever area you want to focus on as a coach. So final section is the self-work, the inner work. I had a colleague who works with a lot of different coaches to provide the systems that actually magnify a person's gifts. Because I've hired people to create systems and automation for me before, but they tend to be more person oriented. It took me a long time to find a person oriented automations systems expert. For those of you who know her, her name is Miriam. She's one of my secret weapons. She's incredible. If you ever work with me in building a person successful business, you will likely be introduced to her, and she'll likely rock your world in the best way to help show you the automation or the systems you actually need. She, like what I'm talking about, doesn't sell you what she could sell you. She wants to connect and find out what you actually need. Anyway, regardless of all that, I was having a conversation, and well, now that she's not anonymous, I don't even know if I should share this. Well, I'll share it anyway. I don't think she'd mind. And if she would, we'll work it out. She said, Paul, why is it that it's my coaches that are her clients? And she has a lot of different companies and businesses and people that hire her to do what she does. She says, why is it that it's my coaches that have the most limiting beliefs? She's just reflecting on that irony. Why is it? And I didn't have a good answer for it other than well, it's because it's their sensitivity that creates the limiting beliefs that actually makes them great coaches. They're just having a tough time, getting the lift off, really getting it going. And but now I have an even more concrete answer. It's because they're persons, because they have a person orientation, and they've been living in a heavily people person strategic world. And so they're trying to honor their authenticity, but they're doing a system that's just a little bit off from that, so it doesn't quite line up. And have you ever seen like the way lasers work and cogs and wheels? Like if it's a little off, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It can look like it's working, but man, the end result just doesn't seem to appear. And so with that, you're going to want to understand your own self-work on a couple of levels. One, we already talked about the imposter layers. Stop trying to get rid of those sensations. They are helpful. And when you start to learn how to reappraise those, you start to learn how to have your own spoken, unspoken, and sensation conversations with yourself. It will naturally lead to you being able to have those with your clients, potential clients, family members, people that you love, are in love, whatever, to be able to bring all three of those elements that we were talking about into all of your relationships. That comes from your own inner work, but it's hard to do. And one of the biggest reasons it's hard to do is the second thing you're going to want to learn to navigate as a person coach, and that is the trap of explanation. Okay? Explanation is one of the reasons why we trust the spoken conversation more than we even trust the unspoken conversation in our heart and the sensation conversation in our gut. Because we've been groomed to trust explanation. Oh, explanation gives us this endorphin response. Case in point, have any of you ever stood up too fast and felt nauseous, felt like you're gonna fall over? Yeah, but because you have a good explanation for it, you don't freak out. So there is benefit to explanation, but we love to overdose on it. Okay? In fact, this session alone somewhat plays into the explanation trap. Granted, I'd like it to work to my advantage with some of you, this evening, that because I'm explaining being a person versus people person, it feels liberating. Has anyone experienced this tonight or when I talked about this a few weeks ago? Like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. Why I've been so frustrated with this. Why I haven't trusted myself with that. Why it just hasn't seemed to add up the way it does for other people because of the explanation that I'm providing. But that's where we stop. And as coaches, we're constantly feeding ourselves explanations from books, explanations from podcasts, explanations from events. And we are just strengthening that muscle, and it's creating an imbalance in our own self-work. And it creates even the smallest gap of inauthenticity from people person to person stuff that it feels like this. Okay? We're not providing a robotic service as a person coach. One of the hallmarks of being a person coach or leader is that you are tremendously exposed. And I don't mean like everybody knows everything about you. I mean you are energetically exposed because it's how you are available to theirs. It's what makes niches less important. It's what charges your batteries to get into the trenches with someone is you're already in a place where you're like, here I am. And it makes you more available for when you get into that conversation to more genuinely, more fully be able to go, there you are. Versus, here I am, but let me put this over here. Hey, where are you? Like that's one of the most frustrating things in trying to build this. So being able to have a self-work regimen. And one of the ahas for me in this was, wow, I've been teaching coaches how to be better person coaches, which typically are personal coaches dominantly. The majority of what I do will always be personal coaching. I love it. It charges my batteries, but I do enjoy groups. But groups is where I've been teaching coaches, mentoring coaches for the most part until the last couple of years. I have almost been strictly personal with it because it actually makes more sense for a person to learn on that level. Not everybody is able to meet me there with that level of investment. And so, as we're wrapping up tonight, I want to give you an opportunity to integrate this, to move beyond just the explanation of tonight, and to be able to experience a group for the economics and a small, intimate group, but also be able to get personal coaching with me as well. And what is being called the upgrade evolution experience, group experience. All of this has been under the umbrella of what I've been calling the upgrade evolution. Essentially telling coaches, you don't need another certification, you need an upgrade. And that's turned into the discovery and the clarity of you are a person. Our economy, our world, our society needs more person coaches, and they are dying on the vine because they are being taught dominantly people person energy, people person modalities, people person strategies, which again aren't that much different, but they're different enough that the wires aren't connecting. So for those of you that would like, I would invite, it will be a small number. Most of my groups like this are 5 to maybe 8 people. Okay. We want to go through this. It's going to be 8 group sessions where we are going to go through 2 sessions for each of these 4 areas and interact and talk about what have you done? What have you tried that sounds like what I'm teaching you? And where could we find the nuance that will actually get it to gain traction, to really get into the nitty gritty and the interactions of the lead generation for 2 sessions, the client acquisition for 2 sessions, the actual engagement itself, and your own self work, which is, there's some really particular things we'll be able to focus on in those 2 sessions that take up a fair amount of time, but the self-work is going to be woven throughout it. And then 4 one-on-one sessions with me for the person to person kind of mentorship and interaction and coaching on all 4. And also, we're not going to do it as 2 sessions on one, 2 set. That's not how this is going to work most effectively. We're going to do 1 session on the first area, lead generation, 1 session on, and we're going to cover that one. Then we're going to go back through and go even deeper. Okay, anyone been in a group where it had a progression? You're like, wait, I'm still working on lead generation. I haven't quite gotten there. We're getting so far. No, that's why we're going to go through it and get some basics in place and then go back and have actual experiences. Kind of, you've developed your own case studies in that to be able to go back through. So if you'd like to join that, you can't just go in and sign up. It's by invitation. because I do small and intimate groups, I am a bit of a, and I mean this lovingly and invitingly, a bit of a gatekeeper. Okay. So if you'd like to do that, okay, you can do one of two things. You can put in the chat right now that yes, you're interested in that because I want to have a conversation with you about it. If these explanations landed and we had this peak experience and I was like, here's the link, go sign up today, um, then uh, um, then we're risking creating that peak experience that you and I are going to be chasing through the whole group and even in our personal sessions. Okay, hang on, I've got to write a couple of names down of people that are messaging me directly that are already interested. That's awesome. Very cool. So you can just put interested, yes, or whatever, just message me directly. Or you can reply to any of the texts or emails for the reminders of this event tonight. Or if you're watching this recording, it was likely emailed to you. So reply to that. Awesome. Cool. And by the way, it's, um, yeah. Um, I went back and forth on whether to say the price because there's so much psychological conversation about that. Like, do you say the price or do you wait till you can be talking to the person personally and whatever? And I wasn't going to say it, but for whatever reason, I'm feeling impressed to just say it right now, just for transparency. But the investment in the group with the personal sessions is $5,000. There's probably quite a few extras that if I had a slide, if I was interested in having that curated, whatever kind of thing, I would show bonuses and whatever. You're going to get those anyway, because that's just my nature to go above and beyond. Those of you who have worked with me know that that's how I like to work. Um, uh, Access to Marco Polo with me and different things to be able to dig in a little bit deeper will likely be available as a part of this experience. But on top of that, payment plans will absolutely be available. So I already looked into some great options that are cheaper than credit card interest rates. I mean, they're not the single digit interest rate loans we used to be financing. We used to be able to get when the economy was ridiculously over whatever. But certainly, if this is what you really want, if you're feeling this and you want to consider this and dive into this, then there are options. So if the number I just put out there feels like a gasp, let's talk. Let's work together. In fact, right off the bat, for those of you who attended this, I've already put in the chat that you want to talk to me. So I'm just making sure that I get everybody down. It's awesome. Thank you. Or you reach back out between now and let's just say the next couple of days, or if you're watching this recording, if I just emailed it out to you between now and the next couple of days, I'll provide a discount that will make if you have to do a payment plan, it'll be like getting a single digit interest on that payment plan because I'll knock quite a bit of money off of that, or it'll just be a discount if you end up paying up front. So either way, it's a win-win for you. So it's 8 weeks or 8 sessions every other week. So 16 weeks, all the sessions. We're starting in February by the end of February. I haven't picked a final date yet, but it'll start in February. That's the commitment I've made. And it'll be Wednesdays at 6 p.m., the same time as this presentation. All the sessions, group sessions and our individual sessions, I'll have my AI note taker in there so that it can organize the talking points and the action items and even give you an audio transcript and written transcript for you to be able to review that recently. UV, I know you started picking up on that in our sessions and other things. Has that been helpful for you to be able to have that organized from AI and the audio and everything? Like that's pretty rad, right?
Yeah, no, I like it a lot.
Yeah. So, and that kind of makes it evergreen for you to be able to go back and keep getting things out of that. But the 4 personal sessions, those are your prerogative. I would recommend you have the first one early on, the second one at some point during, the third one towards the end, and then you can hang on to the fourth one for like a month or two after we finish for deeper integration as you've been working on this. So that's really it. I said 90 minutes and I'm only 2 minutes over. And if you've ever attended a presentation with me before, that's pretty fill in bad word, awesome. That's pretty incredible for me because yeah, anyway, I want you guys to win. And so I get in these and I was just like, keep giving them more, keep talking about why and get this deeper so that if you don't do anything with me, hopefully you can take something I said tonight and run with it. But I would love to, if you're not on this list of people that have messaged me directly, get on it. Reply to one of the texts or the emails and let me know. If you're watching this recording, reply to the email and let me know. Like I said, it's 5 to 8 people, very limited spots because I want even the group sessions to feel really personal and intimate. And again, if the price scares anybody, just know we can break it up and just think of all the stuff that makes you feel icky to say in a close, and just pretend I said it to you anyway, and it pushed you over the edge and you decided to jump and do this. So okay. Anyway, but again, you don't get to sign up from here. I'm not sending a link for you to sign up from here because I want you to think about this and I want you to talk yourself out of it and then talk yourself back into it and then talk yourself out of it, then be like, that to me, that's a sign that I shouldn't do it. And then, I get to talk and explore that and find out, because that's your curriculum. It's really interesting to, I believe it was Einstein who said that the mind cannot solve a problem that it created itself. It's really interesting that we can notice the things we want to change, but then we try to decide whether we're going to make an investment or make a sacrifice to change them with the same brain that doesn't want them to change. That's a really interesting, complex challenge. And that's why the way you connect with people, the transformational conversation you have as a person, is so important, because we're getting sick of the lack of payoff of the explanation and of a handful of people that are oriented a certain way being successful and being paraded in front of us to just make us feel worse for why we weren't able to be. It's time for you to be able to find you. And then if you're a coach or a leader, you get to go help other people do that and find the person orientation that they have. Because I think there's a lot more persons out there, not in general, but that are not being reached by other persons. I think that's a super important thing to consider. So, all right. Thank you, everybody, so much. I would love that, even if you didn't say yes, or you're not planning to reach back out, I would love just any feedback via text or email as well, what you got out of the session, what mattered to you most. If you don't mind taking a moment to do that as soon as you hop off here or sometime in the next 24 hours while it's fresh, that really helps me improve the way I can show up in these sessions and continue to do these. So your feedback is appreciated. And those of you who have already been added here to the list, I look forward to following up with you very soon and exploring your orientation. Again, even if you are a people person orientation, you still have a massive opportunity of a market of people who are person oriented. And so it would serve you still to learn that. But that's it. 5 minutes over. That's all I gave myself as a buffer. So much love. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I am honored by your attention and that you cared enough about what I had to say to come listen. Have a great night. Bye.